Welcome everyone to our Important Industrial Commission meeting this morning. We have a couple of people here I'd like to recognize, and of course we have Mr. Rowe, our mayor. Mayor Rowe, thank you for being here.
Everybody.
Good morning.
Councilwoman Simmis, thank you for being here this morning. Councilman Mr. Moody, good to see you this morning. And we have members of staff. We appreciate everyone here, and we have some very nice guests here we'll introduce in just a moment. So just want to welcome everybody here. Mr. Moore, could we have a roll call, see if we have a quorum?
Yes, sir. Good morning, everyone. Mr. Barrow.
Here.
Mr. Bento.
Here.
Mr. Peterman.
Here.
Mr. Reinerberg.
Here.
Mr. Toops.
Here.
And Mr. Wallace. Here.
We have a quorum. Thank you very much. Okay, we just, if we could go ahead and get a couple housekeeping items out of the way quickly this morning. Everyone should have got a copy of last month's minutes. And could I have a motion to pass the minutes as presented?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
Any discussion? If not, Mr. Moore?
Mr. Barrow.
Yes.
Mr. Bento.
Yes.
Mr. Peterman.
Yes.
Mr. Reinerberg.
Yes.
Mr. Toops.
Yes.
Mr. Wallace. Motion carries.
Thank you very much. Minutes are passed as presented. I'd also like to look at the January financials, see if anyone has any comments on that. But first, do we have a motion to accept the financials as presented?
Move to accept. And I'll
Second.
second.
We have a second. Any discussion?
I just have a quick question.
Yes, sir.
Going back to, I've been looking at this for a while here, the total cash and temporary investments. How much cash do we actually have?
The cash we have as of January 31st was $1,053,062.
Well, that
That's
was-
in the bank.
That was cash and temporary investment.
Including, yes.
Yeah, investments, we're looking at over $500,000. Where is that cash going? Where do we have that cash parked right now?
Let me double check and get back to you how the money is invested.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
Any further discussion?
It's including investment.
Mr. Moore?
All right, Mr. Barrow.
Yes.
Mr. Bento.
Yes.
Mr. Peterman.
Yes.
Mr. Reinerberg.
No,
Mr.
Phuket is
Toops.
here.
Mr. Wallace.
Yes.
Motion carries.
Okay. Financials are accepted as presented.
Yes.
Okay. Mr. Nussbaum next, isn't he?
Yes.
Okay. We have with us today Mr. Nussbaum to follow up on our bond issue for Chantilly, Virginia. Would you please welcome in? Please follow up.
The place you want me to stand?
Anyway, I think you're good where you are.
Okay. Well, good morning, and thank you for having me back for the presentation of the final bond resolution for your approval today. This is for the CYA Sport and Community Center LLC project up in Chantilly, Virginia. You'll, I'm sure, I remember all too vividly your review of the matter back in December. At this point, we're aiming to close somewhere in the first 2 weeks of March, and I'll be getting back in touch with Robert to line up the chairman, assuming I'll approve the resolution today, of course, line up the chairman and Robert's signatures possibly as early as early next week, and if that schedule is convenient. But everything's been going smoothly. We got approved by the Fairfax County EDA and their host jurisdiction approval on January the 9th, and by Fairfax County Board of Supervisors on February the 5th. So that the entire public approval process has been completed successfully. The final bond amount is ending up in the odd amount of $4,643,940.21, which is what the outstanding balance of the loan that is being refinanced is. So that's why we have a bond down to the odd penny. I really don't have anything more to add. You've got a busy schedule today. I don't want to take up any more of your time. I'm happy to answer any questions that anybody has about the transaction at this point. Otherwise, I respectfully ask that you adopt today's final bond resolution.
Okay, before we do, we had quite a bit of robust conversation, as you referred to, and I just wanted to know if the commission had any other comments or questions.
Well, one thing, I think when we left off, there was a question as to what our support amount would be, whether it be an 1/8% or 10%.
That's
Is that
correct.
correct? Has that been resolved?
Oh,
Or?
yeah. You all are getting the full 1/8% that the IRS regulations permit.
Okay, very nice.
Which will be about how much money?
4,500.
I think it was around $4,500.
I think it was, yeah.
Thank you.
That's
Yeah.
$4,500.
And it's going to be on of course, on the declining principal balance as they pay down.
Okay.
Any further questions? Okay, then, has everyone had a chance to read this? This was sent out to all the members. All the commissioners saw this. Okay, so at that point, I'd like to see if we can get a motion to pass this resolution today as presented to this body.
I'll make that motion.
No, second.
Second. Mr. Moore?
Mr. Barrow,
Yes.
Mr. Bento,
Yes.
Mr. Peterman,
Yes.
Mr. Reinerberg, I'm sorry.
Yes.
Mr. Toops.
Yes.
Mr. Wallace.
Yes.
Motion carries.
Thank you very much.
Aye.
All 6 commissioners are present today, is that what I meant?
That's correct.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, I'd like to come back to the ad hoc and go into new business. I think we're going to come back under new business to the Budget Ad Hoc Committee. And Mr. Peterman, if you would be kind enough to introduce our guest. Mr. Peterman brought Admiral Rock and is in the idea of talking about this property out on St. Julian's, and he's brought this to the attention of this body. We've talked about it for years and are very interested in hearing about it. So, Mr. Peterman, if you would introduce our guest, I would appreciate it.
Yeah, in fact, I met Admiral Rock at the Norfolk MEDAC meeting, and he gave a great presentation on basically the status of, Navy properties or naval properties within the Hampton Roads area. And some of them, are very specific to Portsmouth, being St. Julian's Creek, the shipyard, the hospital. And so I invited him to attend. And he also talked about public and public-private partnerships that he would like to undertake. And when I briefed that to last meeting, he got a lot of the good thing of the meeting was the day after the MEDAC, so it was fresh in my mind. I hadn't forgotten it. So that's why I invited him over here, and he brought over the shipyard commander as well, as a member of his staff. But just a little bit about Admiral Rock. He's a native of upstate New York. He was commissioned.
Don't hold that against me.
That's why I'm from Pennsylvania. It's still cold up there,
Yes, sir.
But he's a native of upstate New York, commissioned in 1987 through the Naval Reserve Officer Training Program at Texas A&M. I was a Rossi guy out of Penn State, but don't hold that against you either. But holds a master's degree from National Security Strategy from the National War College. He's been on the Mahan, the Tisdale, the Abraham Lincoln, USS Cole, USS Leyte Gulf. He was XO of the Donald Cook, which is one of those brand new the Arleigh Burke destroyers, and he was commanding officer of the high-speed vessel Swift, HSV-2. He also, ashore, he was the Command, Control, and Communications Plans Officer for European Policy, the Military Political Advisor to Joint Forces Command, the Deputy Executive Assistant and Flag Secretary to Commander, U.S. Joint Forces Command and Strategic Allied Command Transformation, which I think everybody knows those guys over in Suffolk and Norfolk. And he's now in command of the Navy's Mid-Atlantic region ever since July of last year. So, Admiral Rock.
Well, thank you, sir. Mayor Rowe, good to see you again, sir.
Yes, sir. Good to see you.
Councilwoman Sims, an honor to meet you this morning. Chairman Bento, thank you very much for having me. And commissioners, it really is an honor to be here. I know how aggressive and valuable your time is here, and I really am grateful for the chance to spend a little bit of time talking about what I think is opportunity for all of us. And I thought I'd do a couple things today. First, aside from that bio, which makes me feel old, help you understand where I fit, and then give you a little bit of insight into where the Navy is today and where we're challenged. But I prefer to flip that and turn that challenge into opportunity. And I think we share some of the same challenges that you do, and because of that, I think there's real opportunity. Before we get too far into this, I owe you, Mr. Mayor, a thank you. About a week and a half ago, I think most of you had heard on the news that we believed we had an active shooter event at the shipyard, and as horrific as one of those things are, I tell you that the city of Portsmouth Fire and Emergency Services and police force were there in a minute. And we cannot ask for better partners than we have here with the city of Portsmouth. So thank you very much for that type of support. It really is assuring to know when the chips are down, you were all in for us, and I'm very, very grateful for that. At the end of the day, it turned out to be nothing, thank goodness, but it's reassuring to know that we're in this together. In terms of where I fit, I provide oversight resources to Navy bases in the Mid-Atlantic region, which is defined as Chicago to the eastern seaboard and South Carolina to Canada. As it relates to Portsmouth, Captain Kai Torkelson, I think all of you know Kai, the shipyard commander. That poor man has multiple bosses. Being one of our 4 public shipyards in the U.S. Navy, his number one mission is production, fixing, repairing, modernizing ships, and he does that better than nobody. But on the side, he also runs all the support services that it takes to run a shipyard: security, fire and emergency services, child care, food and beverage operations, all that kind of stuff, real estate. So in that regard, Kai and I work together. I don't get into his business on the shipyard and running of a shipyard because I know nothing about it. But all the ancillary support that it takes to do that, Kai and I work together. In terms of where the Navy is looking, I think we've all heard about a bigger, stronger, faster Navy, 355-ship Navy. I'm not sure what that looks like for the city of Portsmouth, but I can tell you that it looks different than it is today. Are we really going to realize a 355-ship Navy? I don't know. It's really in the hands of Congress, but it is our goal. It is what multiple studies have shown is the global requirement to support our commitments. And we are on a path to try to get to that point. But I think it causes some challenges for us, particularly in and around Hampton Roads in Portsmouth, and those challenges are not new to you. It's an industrial base, right? And growing that industrial base and all the support that goes with it, from transportation services to schools to housing to all that supporting elements that it takes to build that kind of capacity. So more to follow, and I'd like to just have a continued dialogue with leaders of the community as we understand what that strategic view really looks like as we get more detail. One of the elements that it does look like, I think, is something that you may also have heard about called our shipyard optimization plan, which is a 20-year, $21 billion investment in our 4 public shipyards. Good news is that I think is opportunity for the city of Portsmouth. The bad news is it's yet to be resourced. I know I'm going to sound like a broken record here, but I think we share we share the challenge of some financial pressures in trying to do what's best for our communities, our Navy community, the community here in Portsmouth, and that's where I think we've got opportunity. Opportunity to work together to do things more smartly that becomes mutual benefit for both of us. We have initiated a joint land use study with the cities of Chesapeake and Portsmouth. That is going to get at the issue of these kind of mutual opportunities, be it transportation issues, be it sea level rise issues, be it cooperative activities where I think we have excess capacity or you have excess capacity in which we can share. And I don't have all the answers to what that looks like, but I do want to start a serious dialogue on that so that we can work smarter together and try to make the ends meet where both of us, I think, are pressurized. Mr. Peterman, did you want to chat about the map here and talk about some potential opportunities, or just let me keep rolling?
I'd like you to keep rolling, but if you could talk, specifically about Craney Island as well as St. Julian's Creek, that would be a wonderful thing.
Sounds good. So you are all familiar with what we have here, and I see two areas, maybe three, in which we have potential opportunity for some shared partnership. Craney Island is one of them, and I know Port of Virginia is very active with the Navy to looking at how we can be more cooperative there to further economic development. But there is some opportunity. Undeveloped areas in and around here, undeveloped area in and around here that perhaps we can explore more further. St. Julian's Creek is also I think ripe for more discussion. It is, as you all know, part of the city of Chesapeake, but nonetheless still in the neighborhood, and I think there's an opportunity there for both the Navy, Chesapeake, and Portsmouth to do more. And perhaps there are some facilities in and around the shipyard itself that are underutilized that we may be able to explore a bit more. So I see a bright future with lots of opportunity. The other area, and it's rather mundane, but I think provides us a chance for a more cooperative partnership, is something that we're calling intergovernmental support agreements. And these are things, municipal services that the cities and navies provide that perhaps doesn't, perhaps there's a better way. For example, trash removal, snow plowing, road paving, high voltage electricians, those types of services that you all provide to the city of Portsmouth that perhaps where you have excess capacity we could tap into, not for free, but for some savings on my part, and perhaps there are areas where we have excess capacity that you could leverage. There are plenty of examples around the Navy where this has been successful, but the conditions have to be right, and excess capacity and need, where those two overlap, is kind of the sweet spot, and I'd like to explore that as well. So I think I'll stop there and open it up for any of your thoughts or questions or concerns. And when I get in way over my head, I'm going to call in Kai Torkelson or Doug Taylor to to bail me out on this one since I'm in their backyard.
Thank you, Admiral, and I didn't get a chance to say welcome aboard, so thank you
Thanks,
for being
sir.
here. One of the questions I think that we kind of discussed amongst ourselves is, is there anything in the future at all for that St. Julian's Creek area as far as that you would be able to talk about that the Navy has any ideas on that property or what could be done there?
No, and that's why I say that to me, it seems like opportunity.
Well, you'd mentioned at the MEDAC about land swaps and whatevers. Is that still on the table?
It is. It absolutely is. And what that looks like for St. Julian's Creek, I don't know. I don't think, given the activities that go on there and the potential to relocate them, I think we have an opportunity to do that, but it's not a short-term. I don't think this is a short-term solution to anything, but you got to start with a vision and get on this path and start deliberately moving towards whatever that vision looks like. And I'm eager to define what that is, because I think it's ripe. If you've been to St. Julian's, it's ripe for redevelopment.
Well, we had a brief a couple of weeks ago from the Virginia Port Authority, where they gave us this brief of offshore wind and whatever that they gave us. And, we look at the pier, the frontage there, the deep water, the 40-foot channels there that used to, during World War II and whatever, it was used heavily. And I think right now appears to be abandoned. I think, but I'm not sure. But, so the question is, one of the things that Portsmouth suffers from is the boundaries. We're surrounded by everybody. There's not a lot of usable land around here. And so when you look at, developable things, there's Craney Island, St. Julian's Creek, and, and what they're doing out in the dredging area out by, whatever is going to happen out there. So anything we can do to kind of get available, property to be able to reuse it, bring it back into service would be wonderful, especially if it's pierside and deep water.
Is the vision to support kind of industrial use? Is that
That would be
just
correct.
broadly?
Yes.
Okay.
Because this is the Portsmouth Port and Industry Commission, so we're not, we're not housing, we're port and industry.
Right.
And so that's our scope, but we're interested in the city as a whole.
This commission, I don't know if you're aware, Admiral, brings to bear some unique authorities under Virginia code that give us the ability to do this development, or really for Portsmouth, it's redevelopment. Everything has been developed at least once in Portsmouth. So, and I realize you look at a very broad area across your particular AOR. For us, when we see that map, every nook and cranny and inlet, we're looking at a very narrow scope. And really anything, a 1 acre of land, if we can redevelop something like that, that's, we're looking at that small a piece to a St. Julian's Creek. And I look at that map there and I see, in particular, so Southgate, and this is maybe more in line with the shipyard, very small piece on the map, but to us, when we look at this several acres that appears not have been used in 15, 20 years. We're actually looking at that small a piece if we can do so. So that's kind of our scope.
One of the challenges that I see in these types of discussions and being in the job for the last 6 or 7 months is this dance we get into with this type of discussion, and it's what do you need versus what can you provide, and we can never really bridge that. It seems to get to a point where we can move out on a plan. So it would be helpful to the Navy if you would table an idea that we could then build on and turn it into some type of proposal that we could be very deliberate with. Rather than we've got some ideas and we'd like the Navy to make a commitment to land swap a piece of property. Let's just throw the idea on the table and see if it sticks, rather than waiting for each other to figure out what right looks
You need something
like.
concrete to say yay or nay or massage.
I think so, and it doesn't have to be a well-developed solution, and just an idea that we can all kind of rally around and flesh out to see if it makes sense for everybody.
Well, how about that joint land use study that you mentioned? What's going to happen with the results of that?
So the results will become very public, and where there is resourcing, we'll attempt to move out on the recommendations of the study. This is another area where we're challenged. I think you may be familiar with a program that was authorized in the Defense Appropriations Defense Authorization Act of last year, called DSIP, Defense Communities Infrastructure Program. And this is where Department of Defense will kick in some cash on these types of projects with a cost share of municipalities, whether it's local or state governments, to solve some of these recommendations that come out of joint land use studies. So that's good news. The bad news is there's no appropriation to go with the authorization. So there's no cash there. But you got to start somewhere, right? You've got to start with a vision. And for me, the DSIP program is reflective of a commitment of DoD to recognize that these types of opportunities are important. And just because it wasn't resourced this year doesn't mean it won't be in the future. And in fact, if the joint land use study that we're doing together produces some worthwhile recommendations, it gives me the leverage to push on that a little bit harder and get some of our federal elected officials involved to help us push this. And I could use your help on doing that because I can't lobby Congress, but you perhaps could, Mr. Mayor.
Mr. Chair, if we focus in on the South Gate and those piers there, and let's say that we do have a use for that, what is the Navy's preference? Is it a long-term lease? Is it declaring the property surplus or land swap? Which works best? How's the quickest way to get to the finish line?
I think a lease would perhaps be the quickest way, and correct me, team in the back, if I'm going off target. Quite honestly, I think from my perspective, a land swap is more productive for me, assuming that is excess. And the land swap would not be necessarily one parcel for another, but could be a parcel of land for like services. I don't want a check, because the check goes to the Treasury and I can't spend it.
What's the approval process? Is it DOD on a lease, or is it Navy? If it's a...
If it is a lease, it's through Department of Navy.
Okay, so
it is, and I say the lease is potentially the quickest because it is all controlled within my domain.
Good. What's the longest term?
We have entered 50-year leases.
We can do year by year, but up to 5-year. Similar to what we've done with the all-field lease.
Right.
With Craddock, for Craddock lease, same thing. That would be the quickest.
Okay. On a land swap, does that have to have congressional approval?
It does.
Okay.
But there is a lot of congressional interest and support in this because we can, I think, all clearly tie it to economic development. and that provides goodness. So those, if you follow due course, is at least a year-long process, perhaps as many as 2 to consummate the deal, but could be shortcutted with direct support from a member.
I'm curious, in your conversations with the Port Authority, how much of that acreage are you guys talking about with the port on Craney Island?
What we're talking about is a third crossing, and the potential use of a corner here for a bypass. We haven't moved that aggressively on it from at least a Navy perspective yet. I do have some sea level rise challenges. If you've been to Craney after any kind of significant weather, this lower portion gets quite flooded. This is high ground, so I've got some challenges there in terms of understanding what Navy redevelopment of Craney would look like and how that would impact a bypass. But I think it's still ripe for cooperative opportunity there, whether it be in this undeveloped section or anyway.
It's a bit complicated in the sense that the city has a landfill that's west, and with the expansion by the port of Craney Island on the east side, the port would like to be able to connect VIG to the eastward expansion. The world's, or the East Coast's largest gas station is right there on Craney, so I'm sure that you've got security concerns.
We do, but the discussions I've had with the port are all very very congenial. I completely recognize the economic value to this area, and I don't want the Navy to stand in the way. And I'm confident we can find solutions to all this, be it Craney Island or Southgate or St. Julian's, any of this. I just see opportunity. I don't see impediments, but it is complex.
Getting back to Southgate, I do have a couple more questions, if that's appropriate.
Absolutely, Mayor, I do too. Go ahead.
Okay. If we look at the lease route and given a 5-year lease, is the consideration only a lease payment, or do you want something more? I know parking's a big issue for Kai. Do these deals get enhanced if we can solve a portion of your parking?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Absolutely. This is exactly the discussion we want to have. Because writing a rent check it could be problematic. Where we could potentially develop something that is good for both the Navy and the city and any industrial environment. Shared parking is a great example of that, sir. So it would be, the rent payment would be in kind of like-kind services. So yeah, absolutely, sir.
Thank you, Mayor, because I had written that down as part of when you said, that in-kind services would be considered, and I think that's an eye-opener to all of us here on the commission. So, and that certainly helps the city of Portsmouth, move forward, as well as, we've had some ideas of pulling in private sector as well. So, maybe a little bit strong language, but what you're really talking about is if we could come with an unsolicited proposal type of situation and bring that to the Navy to get real conversation started, that's where we need to be.
Yes, sir, and half-baked is okay to start the discussion like that. Yes, sir.
Okay. Fantastic. Any other questions for the Admiral?
If we were to go with this lease scenario, and again, I'm looking at Southgate, and not to put you on the spot, but I guess the idea would be to use those piers for some sort of maritime commerce, loading, unloading ships. I'm sure there'd be a substantial amount of capital improvement that would need to be done. Would that be our responsibility as a leasehold? Is there any give or take there, or?
I think there's very little give and take from a Navy perspective. If you've been on a Navy base lately and seen the conditions of our facilities, then you know the challenge that I face in trying to make ends meet. But to your point, Chairman Bento, I think this is where the private partnership in this equation it could be very, very helpful. Not just public money.
But picking up on that question, any improvements to those piers would have to meet Navy standards?
I don't know. Do you know, Doug?
Sir, my sense is the answer would be yes, because what we use those finger piers for right now is safe haven and berthing for ships during destructive weather. So we'll tie just about anything up there that concerns the hardware site. So there would be an agreement as opposed to, so in the event that the Navy did have to make those available, so say.
And that's understandable, and I thought that might be the answer.
But is that a definitive answer, or do you need to go see a lawyer?
I'd have to run that back to the
Okay.
Yes,
Because that's a
sir.
pretty big question.
It is a big question. It is a big question. And these come, this is part of the consideration process on the fair market value. There are provisions in these leases to make improvements to facilities, and then how do you dispose of those?
Standards so high.
Yeah.
Elizabeth just asked if those standards are too high, and I don't think they're, I mean, not to speak for the Navy, but I would think that we would want them to be as good as the Navy for what we want to do at the pier.
Right. If you're berthing a ship there, the Navy standards and the Coast Guard standards, anything for the
Yeah.
port, I think would be about the same.
That's my feeling.
Yeah,
It would be interesting to
understand.
understand the difference between the standards. Admittedly, we have some building construction standards that exceed state and federal regulations that we're reconsidering because it just costs too much money. Why do you need a building with ballistic glass in it in the middle of a base?
And also, going in that direction, assuming that it proceeds, would any renovations, improvements, would they be under the leasehold so that the cost structure is based upon the person providing it, or would it still be under like Davis-Bacon and stuff like that? Because back to cost structure, and it may be getting the cart in front of the horse, but
I think there's opportunity to shape it the way we want.
Good.
But
That makes a big difference.
just generally on the surface, I've seen more of the former
That's
than like a Davis-Bacon solution.
And thank you for being here. We're also trying to take a 10-year viewpoint of where can we find opportunities on a long-term basis. And so obviously y'all are a big kahuna, and anything we can do to be helpful, short-term, long-term, that's why we were excited about having you here. And what I'm listening to is exciting about what the opportunities could be.
I couldn't agree more, sir. I mean, I get frustrated because I spend every single day right here fighting some crazy fire, and that's not what is important. This is important because it's good for all of us. And if the Navy wins, the city of Portsmouth wins,
Great.
Hampton Roads wins. So I really am excited, yet somewhat frustrated that I keep having dances with people and I never get to go on a second date. So I want to go on a second date.
Yeah. Well, that's why I'm looking for the next steps to that second date.
Yes, sir.
Who needs to do what to whom?
I think we need to. We're already getting there, right? We've gone from all of this to Southgate.
Right.
I think we start building on opportunity at Southgate and get interested parties together to shape what that looks like, and then sort out who's got to take what actions from there to make it happen. And in that kind of initial meeting, our pro from Dover is Doug. So I think he's the entry point into sorting out what this looks like. And I don't want to put any restrictions or any limitations or impediments on our vision. There probably will be some along the way, but let's just dream big and see what we can accomplish together and build on it. The other thing I think would be helpful is to put down some aggressive timelines. That will be a forcing function for all of us.
You took the words out of my mouth. I think we ought to do it while you're still the CEO of the Atlantic area. And so that gives us a window of opportunity of 2 years.
You haven't talked to my boss, because on any given day, I'm a second away from being fired.
Well, that makes it really.
That shrinks the time.
We got to move fast.
That sounds good, sir. I want to move fast.
Admiral, before you leave us today, you brought some guests with you, and we want to give you the courtesy if you'd like to introduce your guests to us. I know everybody came here today to be here, and we appreciate that very much.
All right, sir. Well, thank you. I don't think the first two folks that I mentioned are guests. I feel like I'm a guest of part of the city of Portsmouth team, and I include Captain Ty Torkelson and Doug Taylor in that. You know them all as well as I do, and I'm very, very grateful to have them as partners and shipmates. So I know you spent a lot of time with them. From my team, I brought three: Brian Ballard, Michael King. They're our community planning leads. Some of you, I think, have worked with them in the past. They're the two that are keeping me focused on future opportunity, not only for the navies but for our communities around Navy Region Mid-Atlantic. So thank you for your strategic energy and your view, your long view. And then the guy I don't go anywhere without, because he's the one that tells the Emperor he has no clothes on most of the time, and that's Master Chief Justin Gray. He's our senior enlisted leader for Navy Region Mid-Atlantic. So that's the team. Thank you for the opportunity to introduce them, sir.
Mr. Chair, matter of privilege. If you didn't meet Councilman Bill Moody in the back, one of our colleagues, and the reason he's sitting in the back is the Virginia Public Meetings Act. 2 members of council can meet, and we don't declare it a meeting. But if we have 3, we have to declare that it's a city council meeting. And so Bill would be up here, except for that provision of the act. But Bill's our most tenured city council member. He was Air Force. We have a love for the military here. We have especially a love for the Navy. And a little known fact, my father owned that shipyard. At least I thought so when I was electrician in the shipyard. That was my dad's shipyard.
Thank you for that, sir. And I do want you to still consider it your shipyard, because it very much is.
Thank you.
If it wasn't, you wouldn't have sent multiple SWAT teams over there to save us a week and a half ago.
Thank you, sir.
But thank you, sir.
Any other questions for the Admiral?
Good job, Ron.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, absolutely.
All I had to do was ask.
Admiral, thank you so much for being here. It means a lot to us, and I think we need to take advantage of this, and I think you'll be hearing from us sooner rather than later.
We'll be calling for that second date.
Yes. We'll definitely have a second date.
Sounds great.
So thank you so much.
Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Can I ask one more question on the shipyard optimization plan? Does that optimization plan allow for the shipyard to be able to maintain the Ford-class carriers? Because I understand that right now it doesn't, and I'm just wondering, is that part of the plan?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
You know, the Navy is very disruptive here because every time one of the carriers goes down the river, there's nobody in Norfolk and nobody in Portsmouth working at all. Everybody's at the windows. so our productivity goes to zero when your carrier goes by, I can tell you.
Beautiful
That's an
sight.
amazing sight.
It is. We're all very fortunate.
It's just what it's like when you're riding the carrier there.
Yeah, it is amazing to watch that go by.
I know we have our challenges, but
You can't see the shit on either side.
I think we
Yeah.
can all be proud of the fact that despite our challenges, of which we make perhaps too public all the time, you still have the most powerful Navy on the face of the planet. And you play a big part of keeping it that way here in the city of Portsmouth. So thank you for your partnership.
Thank you for your
Thanks for the chance to meet you all this morning.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
You're always welcome.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Very nice to meet you.
Don't tell my wife I have a second date with you.
Yeah,
Thank you, sir. Yes, sir. I'll see you again.
We'll be calling.
Thank you.
I didn't know there's a rule of how many commissioners, council members can be here. Did you?
I know about the council. I don't know if it's the same for commissioners or not.
Yeah.
Elizabeth could probably answer that question.
Oh, yeah.
But probably so. I'm pretty sure that's the same thing. 3 or more.
3 or more is a council.
It consists of a meeting, and you have to have a public announcement.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just.
No. With
That's all the environmental law clinic did, just super fun.
I'd like to make a suggestion, and I'm not sure if this is totally appropriate at this time, just my idea, but rather than us as a commission talking about this month after month in meetings, would it be an idea maybe to stand up a subcommittee to drill down on this thing and be able to take some a little bit quicker action rather than waiting month over month? Or just what do you think?
Or is it something the city ought to, set up a commission? I don't know.
Well, I think we work for the city, so it might be good to have representation on both from the city and but a committee that's actually set up to put a point on the pencil might be a really good idea.
Yeah, I'm just thinking that we need some quick action.
And I think we need to penetrate into some of the private sector and see what the interest is. I know there was a couple large companies that I used to work for, and obviously you guys are connected to some, and that's a huge opportunity. If they even thought those piers could be exposed for their use, I think that would be a huge opportunity. So I think that's what that committee could do, is kind of go into a market penetration and try to get this thing moving.
Yeah, it'd be nice if we...
If you pick 2 of you to kind of be on call to work with Mr. Moore and Mr. Baldwin, you all are a great resource for them in their roles that you can't move, they can. But they need your expertise in the private sector.
Mr. Behrman, I would also say I like the idea of the city because if you're talking about land swaps and between EDA, the school board, the city, the number of pieces of vacant land that maybe if the Navy needs parking and we've got a 5 acres somewhere, they throw a fence around, put a lot, and they can bust people over, but that's owned by EDA, for example.
Right.
I think that broader discussion, we definitely need someone from the city or to participate.
Okay.
It sure may make a small piece of land look a whole lot bigger. When you start thinking of industry, it's too small for industry, but for a land swap and something that the Navy could utilize that's an amazing opportunity.
Especially a land swap for services, not for money or real estate.
Exactly.
Because I've heard him speak twice about how broke he is. And please don't anybody write a check. We need services. We don't need money, because that goes into the national treasury. So that's a good thing.
Speaking, if I may, for the city council, I think your group moving as quick as possible is really important. I like the idea personally of a two-person committee so that you can meet anytime that you want to. I would recommend that you have Robert as part of that. And although that Dustin is not officially a member, I think it's important that if we look at a maritime use, that we have that connection to the Port Authority. And so to you guys, Robert, Dustin, and of course Bob.
I think that's a great idea. I guess so. We need basically two volunteers, and as chair, I'd be happy to sit in whenever. I know we have a restriction there as well, so.
So we can make a motion to make this official, right? Part of the record?
Yes, we can. Sure, absolutely.
I make a motion that we do that.
So
I'll second that motion.
we have a motion to set up a subcommittee to pursue with the Navy on these St. Julian's property, the Southgate properties, or any type of Navy agreement we can come to. Do we have a second?
Sure.
I'll second
After this.
Okay. Mr. Moore?
All right, Mr. Bear,
Yes.
Mr. Bento,
Yes.
Mr. Peterman,
Yes.
Mr. Reinerberg,
Yes.
Mr. Toops.
Yes.
Mr. Wallace.
Yes.
Okay, and the charge of that committee is going to be to move ahead on this as quickly as possible and then bring it back to the group so we can vet it, and we need to include, obviously, Mr. Moore and Mr. Reinhardt, if you will. We'd love to alert you to the meetings
Absolutely.
and bring you in,
And Bob.
And Bob Baldwin.
and Mr. Baldwin, sure.
If it can't be me, of course, Chris.
Yeah.
We kind of work together with this, but
Bring whoever you want, absolutely. Yeah, the more the better from
See,
your
the good part
side.
is because you're not an official member of the body, it doesn't create a meeting.
It doesn't create a
Correct.
PPIC meeting. Exactly.
And you probably need to tour that place. I don't know if you've ever been there before.
Yeah, you need to
Yeah.
two members.
the South.
Do we have,
I've not been.
out of our commission, do we have 2 volunteers that would like to work on this committee?
I don't mind stepping in. I'm not sure what I'm stepping into, but
Well, you just stepped in and put him down before he changed.
Before he changes his
I'm
mind.
happy to help too. The expertise on the maritime side, I think, is really important. And so
Okay.
I'm like that. But I'm happy to. I'm happy to not. I mean, just to help.
Well, I'd be glad to help as well, but
You know, it was him who brought it. So
I mean,
Bring the Navy experience.
yeah.
yeah, I'm fine with
But
that.
we
Yeah,
don't
it makes
wanna
sense,
make-
Ron.
that
Ron, you
Navy
speak
connection,
Navy.
I think, would certainly be a
And
help.
Ned speaks terminal operations,
Yeah.
which
There we
that's
go.
what that would be.
Right.
If that was
There's your dream team.
There you go. Yeah, there's your group.
So it would be
Dream team?
Mr. Peterman and Mr. Barham, you are now it.
Okay.
Thank you, gentlemen.
All right.
So do you have a report for us yet?
You just heard it.
We're moving forward on
Be
Southgate.
calling you tomorrow.
Yep.
Southgate is primary.
That's, yeah.
Well, that was a wonderful, again, Ron, thank you for
Thank you.
bringing that. And I think that was very productive, and we very, very much appreciate Mr. Mayor and council for
Thank you for having
being
me.
here. We really need you guys, of course, we work for you, and we appreciate you being here.
No, I think we work for you, but anyway.
No, we need you more than you need us.
Well, we need to push for the city together, and I think without you, council being here, it's kind of counterproductive, and the staff supports us as well, so we really appreciate it very much. Okay, so moving on back to, we were also talking about, well, I'd like to know, since we have finance here today, what our timeline is on getting that budget prepared, and, or you prepared, but not passed for you. What is our timeline on that? Because I know that an early submission would be very nice for you, and since our budget right now is very uncomplicated, I think,
This will be my first budget, so I know that you know we have less than 4 weeks for our budget to get submitted. So the sooner the better. If you know any. Does that answer your question?
well, I knew it was imminent, so I guess that was why we had talked about setting up a quick ad hoc committee here to try again to just make sure our budget is where we think it needs to be, and then get that to you as quickly as possible.
Yes, definitely. That would be great.
So out of our commission, do we have anyone that would volunteer to? We need I guess a secretary.
Yeah, I did it last year, so I'll volunteer for one of them. since I am the treasurer.
Yeah.
That works? That works? Anyone else?
I'll volunteer.
Fantastic, okay.
So we'll work with them. We'll work to have the budget and have it ready for everyone to review as quickly as possible. Typically, we've done it where we appoint the group in February, the ad hoc committee in February, have something ready, hopefully by that March, April timeframe. So by May, you have an opportunity to vote on it. Pretty much March, April, you come in and discuss it, vote on it in May, and then it's done, typically. But certainly we can move faster as your budget is pretty straightforward.
It is. And hopefully our budget will become more complicated in the years to come. So
We will work on that.
Hey, could I take a step back, just one question on this joint land use study? I mean, for Chesapeake and Portsmouth, who from the city is involved in that?
Well, the project is being managed by the Hampton Roads Planning District Commission. They are the project manager because there's multiple localities involved. So you have teams from Chesapeake and Portsmouth as well as the Navy that are participating. Brian Sweats from the Planning Department is our project manager. But we've got a whole list of people, including the mayor, serves on the Joint Land Use Study Policy Committee. I'll mention the study's been slow to get off the ground. There's been a lot of discussion going on between the local representatives, the Hampton Roads Planning District Commission, and the consultant, trying to get some of the scope of work issues worked out, trying to keep within the project's budget and ensuring it covers all of our Navy facilities. This is a really large joint land use study compared to typical. They might do one installation, they might do Langler. So in our case, they're doing every Navy facility in Portsmouth. So we're having a lot of discussion with them about public engagement, because normally they might have one or two meetings. In our case, we're calling for more because these are different parts of the city. So we're just trying to work through some of those issues, but that's the way the project is set up. The city's got both representatives, I believe it's the mayor and the city manager on the policy committee. Then there's a technical committee that has a number of staff members that are officially appointed as being on the technical committee, and then it's open to others to come in as the project progresses and as other people are needed to participate. So it's kind of a fluid process as you get into it. This is an unusual joint land use study. Admiral Rock mentioned the fact that there's a sea level rise component. You may be aware they're doing a joint land use study over in between Norfolk and Virginia Beach. That's a sea level rise only. In our case, it's a more traditional joint land use study where we're looking at the land along the fence line, as they like to call it. It's really that interface between the Navy facilities and the city. But in our case, there's also a sea level rise component added on to this. This will be the first joint land use study that I'm aware of that puts those two pieces together. So that's where that project is. So it's still a little slow. Again, we're trying to get that thing off the ground. Be glad to report back once we get a little bit more activity where the process actually starts to move more forward. It's going to take about, I would say, maybe 18 months beginning to end once it really gets off the ground.
Yeah, the only reason I ask is, I attended one of the MEDAC meetings where they briefed the results of the Norfolk, Virginia Beach one, and it appeared that it was steered, to certain answers, and I just, I don't know who the involved people were that steered it to those solutions. And cutting down trees over by the old Chambers Field and whatever, and the overpass and the flyovers and whatever. I mean, it had a lot of impact on a lot of things, and I'm just, this is one of those things that when I knew it was happening, but I just want to make sure we're heavily involved because the results are pretty impactful.
Yeah, and I will just tell you that originally when the Navy was originally pursuing the joint land use study, that ended up being the Norfolk and Virginia Beach one. Portsmouth was actually included in that group. I think we're fortunate to not be in that one because that's got a whole different angle on it than what we're looking for. That's one reason we wanted a land use piece of the traditional land use element in addition to, as opposed to, kind of where they've gone. They've spent a lot of time sort of resetting what they've been working on that project over there because they had some fits and starts as to what they're actually trying to accomplish with that. So we'll definitely be very actively involved in it. Mr. Moore will be involved in that. It just depends as we go along what starts to come out. Obviously, each of these facilities has different issues and require some different staff and as well as public engagement pieces to work on.
Yeah, in fact, I guess one of the things I'd like to see is that we could get maybe a quarterly, update as to where this thing is instead of waiting like other people did until it was done and then you hear the outbrief.
Well, we've been working on this for 3 years.
Okay.
Okay, and so it hasn't really gotten started yet. What I would consider, really making a move. Other than we've got a consultant selected, scope of work being worked on, getting the schedule put together. Once the process actually gets started, I think that's a great idea. Right now, I wouldn't have a whole lot to tell you other than what I just told you. It would have been the same thing I'd have told you 6 months ago. I'd have told you the same thing a year ago. This has been a very slow rollout. And again, the Hampton Roads Planning District Commission is project managing, and so they're sort of, in this case, working through the both with the localities, the Navy. They're also working through the Department of Defense Office of Economic Adjustment, who's paying. There's a outside funded, DoD funded study. So they're also working to stay within budget with all the things we're asking them to do, and trying to work through to make sure they can budget the project once they get started. But we'd be more than willing.
I just think that everybody in this commission probably cares about the results of this. And I think I've been only a commissioner for a little over a year, and I've never heard it mentioned except at the BDAC. So I'm just thinking that we need to, somehow be aware of what's going on.
I think you're absolutely right, but just listening now to what you described this, it seems like this is, who knows when, who knows, it's a long way off, 3 years already, and they're still starting. I know the Admiral mentioned it, but I don't want that, and I'm sure you all agree. We don't want that to kind of drive our interest, or even, we need to almost short circuit that, and it seems like the Admiral's got energy to work with us, and while that synergy exists, we need to move, and whatever the study says, great, but it seems like we're going to be waiting a long time.
And more broadly, Mr. Mayor, thank you for being here. Obviously, impactful, and it makes a difference. And part of what we want with our group and more broadly is that when the Navy's looking, is that, hey, Portsmouth is working with us. Portsmouth wants to be our partner. Because when you look at what Amazon just did, and they went to Northern Virginia and they went to New York, and New York started being all over the place, and they said, we're not going to be there. We want, when the Navy needs something, they say, hey, here's a partner. And again, great show today, and let's get moving, because they're giving us an opportunity. Let's drive a truck through it, because that could lead to other opportunities, just step by step.
Thank you. You're so right. Thank you.
Well, on that note, Mr. Peterman, Mr. Barham, if you could publish a date as soon as possible, because there's a lot of other folks involved that are going to have to put it on their calendar as well, to when you can meet and start the process.
Good idea.
We'll talk after the meeting and swap numbers and see if we can come up with something concrete.
Okay. And then we need to publish it to everyone that needs to be, so they can get it on their calendars. But I agree. I think there's a sense of urgency here, and you kind of heard it in the Admiral's voice too. And I think the idea that he's going to be here for a couple more years is, at least if that process were started and well in the works before he was transferred, that will work.
But you're 100% right, because his predecessor had no interest in this.
No, none.
It lets him show activity too, that he's getting things done. So I think there's a
We want to
shared
be part of that handoff 2 years from now.
Yeah.
Okay, any other comments or questions? Mr. Mayor?
Thank you for inviting me.
Oh, thank you for being here. We really appreciate that very much.
And we sincerely appreciate what you do.
And will you send a note of thanks to Admiral Rock's office for having him come? Can we do that?
Do that as we should put that together. And thank you for reminding me, Mr. Reinhardt. I'm very sorry. If you have an update for us, we'd love to hear you. I almost adjourned without being polite.
Report, and it's not the other guy, Small update. Just right now, we do have all our stacks online at VIG, so we're good to go there. We're working still on a north bundle to get the rail going, and that'll be a full south and north bundle with our cantilever rail-mounted gantry cranes. Again, the technology we're using to move as many boxes as we can off the streets and in the interstates, but on the steel highways we have. One thing to note, too, is that I think we sent that around, and you saw the 4 largest cranes in the Western Hemisphere now sit in the city of Portsmouth, Virginia National Gateway. And again, that's the Western Hemisphere, and they're the largest there. The most up-to-date thing, and I believe I sent that to you all as well yesterday, is that we've had really a whole lot of congestion on Virginia National Gateway's terminal, multiple reasons, peak season, bumper crops, and by the way, we're expanding it, essentially doubling that entire facility, so we're having a massive amount of construction. And right now, we've been working with our trucking partners for, every other month is when our motor carrier committee meets, but we've been meeting on a weekly basis to be able to address issues that are happening on terminal and be able to have a more fluid experience for our truckers. And we've been able to decrease that by 34%, their turn times. That's large on multiple reasons. Obviously, they're more productive, and the more turn times they could have and the quicker turn times, that more money for their family and for their industry and their business. It also helps us because we're more productive. The other things that we don't really think about is obviously it saves on fuel costs and it decreases emissions here for our citizens. But also, when you're not waiting on a terminal for an hour to an hour and a half, you don't have in your mind that you're running late or you're running behind. So that you see the other side of it when your trucker is on the interstates, when he's on the roads, he's not in a hurry up and get out of here mentality, he or she. So it really helps slow down and makes a safer traffic pattern. And now we have almost 60% of our truckers using the trucker reservation system. So we know when they're coming, so we're ready and waiting for them, and they have the ability to know when they could get in and out. So we're trying to use as much technology as we can to provide a safer experience for our citizens on our roads, but also be able to get that container. And as you could say here, I'm a little sick. I'm getting over it, so I apologize. I did want to touch, I do government affairs, so I was up in the state for the last 2.5 months. And we were able to get extended our Port of Virginia Economic and Infrastructure Development Grant. So that helps when you have businesses trying to locate to anywhere, especially Portsmouth, obviously, to come here. Senator Lucas had another bill that you have a company that could come here, perhaps they're an LLC, and they don't actually have a taxable base here in Virginia. So basically the grants that they could get, they can't really get that credit to fruition. So they're able to transfer that to other companies. So we could see that as possibly a win-win for 2 companies, bringing companies here into Virginia or Portsmouth as well. As we're doing all this stuff on our terminal, we are looking majorly towards outside our gates. It doesn't matter if you get a cargo container on that terminal, we need to get it away or in. So we're looking at a lot of our rail infrastructure, and one of those projects we are doing would be at Virginia Inland Port, where we use the Rail Enhancement Fund. That's given to us by the Department of Rail and Public Transportation, DRPT. It requires a 30% match, so 70% comes from the state, 30% comes from that entity that is applying for it, or multiple sources. We realized at that time that you can't use federal grants, and when the federal government has increased these rail grants by $1.5 billion with a B, we see an opportunity that is being lost. So we got a piece of legislation that went through, carried by Delegate Stolley, Virginia Beach, and Norfolk, that allows those federal grants to be that match. Now, that doesn't only help us, it helps localities with rail problems, it helps companies with rail developments, whether it be marshaling yards or doubling size of their rail yards. So that it's a huge help, because we really do need to see our long term as we build traffic, and we want a lot of that to be off our interstates. It's quicker, it's more efficient. With that, we also were able to get our bonding increase, so we're doing our RMG refurbishment to the older side of VIG. They've been running nonstop for almost 13 years now, so we're going to give them new brains, new little nuts and bolts to make sure they can run to the speeds and the capabilities that our new ones are running to. And lastly, we touched on a little bit earlier, is the Amazon deal and Micron up in Northern Virginia as well. These deals aren't just something that's a big deal for us. It's a big deal for us in the future, because we're able to, as a state, come to the table with Virginia Economic Development Partnership and the localities to say, this is what we can do. And when you have a company like Amazon say yes, it's not just Amazon that says that's great. It's other companies that say if they could work with Amazon, they could work with us in the city of Portsmouth. So this is a huge news for the state, even though it's nowhere near us in a relative sense. It's really huge news. And then lastly, Virginia Economic Development Partnership entered the budget and received $2 million to develop a site, statewide database for sites, essentially people wanting to move 20 acres, 50 acres, 30 to the 100 acres of mega sites. So when we are looking at these opportunities and we're able to have a land transfer, we do also need to follow up with VEDP to make sure we're on that. So if somebody makes up the phone call and calls the state of Virginia, they could subsequently call the mayor or council lady and say, hey, we have property here, you could come look at it, or obviously in order to. So it's an opportunity that Virginia Economic Development Partnership is undertaking with $2 million the state just granted to them. So.
Okay. And I ask you every time you're here.
Yeah.
PMT update.
Right now, we're still on the aspect of moving those containers more towards VIG. And I know that there are small repairs that are able to be done now that we're taking some of that traffic off that terminal. As far as the long term, I'm not sure operations-wise. Obviously, we're wanting to turn it into the roll-on, roll-off facility, the moneymaker facility that each cargo container is worth so much. Well, smaller things that may be worth a whole lot more money, such as the trucks or break bulk. So I don't know the full aspect of the operations from here on out, but I know generally it's probably the answer you've gotten, so hopefully that's a little different.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to see if there was any, plans for improvements, any capital improvement.
Sure.
That property in the future.
I'm not sure just because of the amount of money we're spending right now on other aspects.
Right.
I know that PMT is being heavily weighed when it comes to the wind turbine opportunity that we're hoping to be having with our state.
If I could, Chairman, to kind of piggyback on what Mr. Reinhardt stated, I would like to say thank you to the port for partnering. When we talk about collaborations, just recently in the General Assembly, Delegate Matthew James put forward, in concert with our legislative liaison, Ms. Sherry Neal, the opportunity for a new incentive to help specifically port host cities. And that would be the cities of Portsmouth, Norfolk, Newport News, Richmond, and Front Royal. After several discussions and several meetings and working with VEDP, Virginia Economic Development Partnership, and after 15 years of Ms. Neal trying to make this happen, I am happy to announce that legislation was passed. And what has happened is the IRF, or the Industrial Revitalization Fund, has been increased from $1.5 million to $2.5 million, and that $1 million is specifically slated for port host cities, for us to assist with revitalization of buildings and sites that are port related, which when you think Portsmouth, that's pretty much everything. So I want to say thank you to Mr. Reinhardt and the team over at the Port Authority and all of the host cities for working on this. This was a long time coming. It was actually Mr. Donahue who came with the idea of expanding the IRF. So want to say thank you. That's another big win for Portsmouth. So we will, as soon as the governor signs that, we will be looking to really formalize the program so that we can utilize it. But I wanted to make that announcement as well.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Reinhardt. It's very informative. Anything else that concerns this body?
Mr. Chair, in answer to a question that was asked earlier in the meeting as to where the Portsmouth's Port and Industrial Commission cash is being held, that's in Town Bank, and the amount at the end of the fiscal year in an interest-bearing account was the $1,052,972. Excuse me. On that amount that month, excuse me, we earned $89.
Over $1 million? Bill? I mean, why aren't we at 2 or 3%? I mean, I got 3% from Town Bank. So I'm just curious. It's a lot of money.
That's something, I'm sorry.
That's okay.
That's something the commission, could discuss.
It's a big difference.
Let's make that part
That's
of
a good
our
point,
budget
yeah, as a
review
review.
and
That's a good
see
point.
where, just
we can
what kind
best-
of vehicle it's in and what we can do about it. I mean, obviously, it's going to be a conservative place, but let's take a look at that as part of that budget review.
Good. Thank you.
Thanks for bringing that up, Mr. Wallace.
Yeah, thank you. Anything else?
Town Bank says thank you very much.
Once again, thank you to everyone, and meeting's adjourned. Thank you.
Very well.